going to turn on interpretation also. Sandra, thank you for being here. Start the webinar. There's that button. Okay. Okay, welcome in everyone. I'm going to give it a few minutes to get started before, or let everybody get in the virtual room before we get started here. Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna kick us off and let everyone know that this is being recorded, so it'll be available on the on our housing website, tahoeliving.org. But thanks for being here today, everyone. My name is Catherine Houston. I'm actually not involved really with housing at all at TRPA, but I'm here to moderate this webinar on stormwater management and housing at Lake Tahoe. This is a presentation on stormwater management and the surprising ways that it relates to housing at Lake Tahoe. So we'll start this presentation with Shay Navarro, who is TRPA's Water Quality Program Manager. And Shay will talk about the basics of stormwater management and how it relates to community design. Following and building on Shay's presentation, Jacob Stock, a returning character here, will go into a little more detail on Tahoe's stormwater management system and specifically focus on coverage. This presentation is part of our Community Academy for the Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin initiative, which is a multi-year planning and policy project aimed at improving access to affordable and workforce housing while protecting the environment. This presentation is meant to provide some general background on the connection between stormwater policy and housing to help you engage with the Cultivating Community Initiative and with other planning efforts more generally. We won't cover everything today. This is the fourth part in our Community Academy series that covers a range of topics related to planning in the Lake Tahoe region. So as I mentioned, this is recorded or is currently being recorded and will be posted to tahoeliving.org. On that website, you can also find recordings of the TRPA 101, Planning 101, and Development Rights 101 under the Resources tab. We realize that there is a lot that can be included in these presentations, and so we do welcome your suggestions for the future presentations and short explainer videos, what topics you want to know more about. And we hope that these webinars can help get community members up to speed so that you can better engage in the process and help shape the changes that are needed. There's a lot we can go over. So again, we welcome feedback and are committed to continuing to tailor our content to best meet communities' needs and interests. We'll have opportunities for questions at the end. And based on feedback that we got from previous webinars, we're going to keep the Q&A focused on questions relevant to this topic, to stormwater management. If you want to go deep on any particular topic, that's not what this forum is for. So we do encourage those other questions to be shared through the survey at the end, or you can email us at housing@trpa.gov with those questions. Next slide, please. Some Zoom protocols. First, I'd like to thank Sandra Rentas for being here again today. This webinar is provided live in Spanish. If you would like the Spanish interpretation for this presentation, please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen where it currently says English, and you can switch it to Spanish. If you're joining us by phone, you don't have access to the Q&A box. And so if you do have a question, please dial *9 to raise your hand. And then I'd call on you and you press *6 to unmute yourself. For everyone else, we're going to be using the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to enter questions at any time. Please don't put questions in the chat. We probably won't see them. And you should be able to see all the questions that are being asked by your fellow attendees. Some of them will be answered electronically or having an answer typed into the box. And some of them we will answer here live. And as I already mentioned, this is being recorded and it will be posted to tahoeliving.org under resources. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to our esteemed water quality program manager, Shay Navarro.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. We appreciate the comprehensive introduction to the webinar. And I'm going to kick off the stormwater portion of our presentation today in talking about stormwater management and housing at Lake Tahoe. So we are really here for Lake Tahoe, which is the largest alpine lake in North America. And under the Clean Water Act, it has a special designation as an outstanding national resource water. And this is due to its exceptional clarity. And this designation basically prohibits any further degradation of Lake Tahoe's clarity and water quality. Next slide. Water quality can be affected by a wide range of human-generated pollution sources, and they are broadly categorized into either point source or non-point source pollution. Point sources of pollution originate from a single source, like from industry or a sewage treatment plant, and they're typically discharged directly to waterways. In Tahoe, sewage treatment was one of the first measures taken to protect Lake Tahoe's water quality through the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act, which was established in 1969. And through this act, it mandated that all sewage from the Lake Tahoe basin that was previously kept in septic tanks and leach fields had to be collected, treated, and exported outside of the watershed to protect water quality. And this is really due to the lake's sensitive ecosystem and the need to prevent nutrient pollution from reaching the lake, which could lead to algal blooms. Non-point sources of pollution are more dispersed throughout the watershed, and they're picked up and transported to waterways through stormwater runoff. Managing stormwater and non-point sources of pollution is really what my presentation is going to focus on today. Next slide. So what is stormwater management anyways? Stormwater management is the process of controlling water runoff from rain or snow melt to minimize negative impacts on the community and the environment, in particular, water quality. Stormwater management systems collect, move, filter, and store stormwater to reduce flooding in neighborhoods and erosion that can lead to pollution and murky water. Erosion basically happens when water runs over soil and picks up particles along the way and washes them into the lake. One of the fundamental ways that stormwater management protects water quality is by stabilizing any sediment to prevent erosion and by collecting water and infiltrating it into the ground where it can be filtered through natural processes. Here's an example of how that works. On the left side of the image shows a natural undisturbed watershed. Here, most of the water is absorbed or infiltrated into the soil where it is cleaned as it flows through vegetation, soil, rock, and sand, recharging groundwater, and then it increases stream flows that enter the lake with minimal erosion or pollutants. The right-hand side image shows a developed watershed. Here, hard or impervious surfaces and compacted soil can prevent natural infiltration of water into the soil. Water runs more quickly off hard surfaces, picking up pollutants and eroding soil as it runs then into the lake. Water from precipitation and snow melt from developed areas transports sediment, nutrients, and other pollutants to Lake Tahoe and its tributaries, which is causing most of the lake clarity loss that we see today. This is obviously a simplification. Lake Tahoe's watershed, and really any watershed, exists somewhere between these two illustrations, but this shows the importance of managing stormwater and promoting natural infiltration to prevent non-point sources of pollution from degrading Lake Tahoe's water quality. Next slide. But stormwater management is much more than just stormwater management. And what do I mean by that? Well, stormwater management requires space. It includes infrastructure that can be gray infrastructure like curbs and gutters, and green infrastructure like vegetated swales, infiltration basins, and wetlands. These soak up and filter stormwater before it reaches the lake. All of this shapes our built environment, including building and landscape design, where and how much development can and cannot go, and it factors into the cost of development. Next slide. In this example, you might not realize that the landscaping in the center of this plaza is actually an infiltration basin that treats water runoff from the roadway next to it. Stormwater treatment can be integrated with other development to provide community benefits. A foundational policy choice shaping stormwater management and the built environment is whether stormwater is managed at the parcel level or the area-wide level. This also determines how infrastructure is managed and paid for. Stormwater management costs no matter what, and the best way to pay for it depends on the situation. Parcel level stormwater management assumes that each individual property owner manages runoff and promotes infiltration on their own property. This can be done by limiting impervious surfaces, building less on the property, and designing landscaping to promote infiltration. Parcel level management works well in rural areas where parcels are large and a smaller percentage of each parcel is developed. In rural environments, natural watersheds are less disrupted, and it is relatively easier to manage stormwater on site. In more urban and suburban environments, a larger portion of each parcel is developed. There are more parcels and more opportunities for disruption in the system when a property does not manage its stormwater, like performing routine maintenance. Please note that regardless of location, all properties must stabilize sediment sources to prevent erosion and maintain fire defensible space at the parcel scale. Next slide. Regional treatment or area-wide stormwater systems manage runoff and promote infiltration across properties in a neighborhood. Instead of relying on each individual property owner to infiltrate stormwater on their land, area-wide systems direct runoff from multiple properties and roadways where it is collected, moved, stored, and infiltrated in specially designed infrastructure built to accommodate the stormwater needs of the whole area. Again, individual properties must stabilize sediment sources to prevent erosion and maintain fire defensible space at the parcel scale, regardless if water is infiltrated or treated at the regional scale. Area-wide stormwater treatment manages stormwater from properties and roads together and can often be integrated with other infrastructure to provide multiple community benefits. Area-wide systems work well in urban and suburban environments where there are many people and properties with less available space, and the natural watershed may already be more disrupted. Here, local jurisdiction public works departments are responsible for maintenance of facilities versus each individual property owner. Because of their scale, area-wide treatment projects can take a long time to plan and build. Area-wide systems are less necessary in rural areas where the cost of building infrastructure over a very large, less disturbed area often outweighs the benefits. Here's an illustration showing how infrastructure can be integrated to provide multiple benefits for the community, including parking, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and landscaping. Now that we've covered the basics of parcel versus area-wide stormwater infrastructure, I'll cover some of the tools used to manage stormwater and create a stormwater infrastructure system. It's important to note that most of these tools work best in combination with one another. The best combination is dependent on the specifics of the area or the parcel. And I'll start with a very basic parcel level tool, land coverage. Land coverage limitations seek to promote natural water infiltration by limiting the amount of land that can be covered by hard or impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces can include the footprint of a building, paved driveways, or other hard surfaces like walkways or patios. In some cases, they can even include compacted soils. More or less coverage is allowed on a parcel depending on its ability to absorb water. Coverage limitations work well in rural areas where there has been less disturbance to the natural watershed and vegetated areas are able to absorb water. Coverage limitations are less effective and difficult to implement in more urban environments where there are more people and there has been more disturbance to the natural watershed. Coverage policies can have a major impact on the built environment that Jacob will go into in more detail in his presentation next. It can lead to poor and inefficient site design and sprawl, among other things. Best management practices, or BMPs, are tools that can be used at the parcel level for stormwater management. BMPs are designed to stabilize soil to prevent erosion and promote infiltration of drainage that's generated by the development on the site. This includes, but is not limited to, things like driveways, roofs, decks, patios, and walkways. For example, a dry well with a sediment track like we see here is a BMP designed to capture water as it runs off the driveway. The sediment trap removes sediment and then water is absorbed back into the ground. BMPs at the individual property level can be expensive, and it's difficult to enforce BMP compliance for installation and maintenance across many properties. Next slide. Other examples of parcel level BMPs can be integrated into landscaping. Here we have a small rock-lined infiltration basin or rain garden that takes water runoff from roofs and walkways. Next slide. Gray infrastructure is a blanket term for infrastructure used to collect and move stormwater with the original intent to prevent flooding. It's called gray because it mostly doesn't use natural features, which we'll get into next. A common example of gray infrastructure are the curbs and gutters used to stabilize the road shoulder and direct stormwater runoff from roadways to storm drains and away from the site. Roadways are a major source of pollution with traction abrasives and oil and grease, and this type of infrastructure does not provide sufficient treatment of fine sediment particles that affect Lake Tahoe's clarity. It can be expensive to build and maintain, particularly over a large area, which is why it is typically reserved for urban and suburban areas where pollution from roads is most concentrated. Next slide. Here's another example of gray infrastructure showing water runoff flowing off of the roadway to the curb and gutter. And this is important for public safety, and then into the drop inlet that connects to the storm drain pipe that eventually flows out to the lake. Green infrastructure, on the other hand, uses natural features with soil and plants to clean and filter runoff before it reaches the lake. Green infrastructure can take many forms and provides a lot of benefits to the community and the environment. Here we have an example of a vegetated swale filtering parking lot runoff collected by curbs and gutters through plants and soils before overflowing to the storm drain and out to the lake. At a larger scale, wetlands are often preserved and maintained as both public open space and as infrastructure to naturally collect and clean stormwater. In urban and suburban environments, green infrastructure is often integrated with gray infrastructure to create a comprehensive area-wide stormwater system. Next slide. Here's another example of green infrastructure located in the right-of-way that combines multiple features. Here we have open cell pavers that are stabilizing the road shoulder and formalized parking while promoting infiltration versus generating runoff like normal pavement. Water runoff then flows along the curb and gutter to the drain inlet where coarse sediment can drop out and be removed by a Vector truck operated by Public Works. Water then flows to a linear vegetation basin behind the curb and gutter to be filtered by plants and soil and to remove fine sediment particles before connecting back to the storm drain and flowing out to the lake. So who pays for all of this to get built and who maintains it? Well, it depends. At the parcel level, individual property owners are responsible for building and maintaining their own infrastructure. This sounds relatively straightforward, but it can be difficult to enforce, and parcel level systems do not treat runoff from roads or the right of way. They end at the parcel boundary. At the area-wide level, infrastructure is often built when land is subdivided for development and maintained by utility districts or local jurisdiction public works. Everyone collectively pays to maintain the infrastructure in their neighborhood. This gets complicated in Tahoe, where land subdivision is not allowed, and the most populated neighborhoods were built well before there was proper stormwater infrastructure in place. So we're left in a conundrum. How do we retrofit our communities to protect our most precious shared resource, the lake? In 1987, Lake Tahoe's regional plan began requiring BMPs installed and maintained at the parcel scale. As of today, approximately half of Lake Tahoe parcels are BMP certified, and they require routine maintenance by the property owner to function as originally intended. A move towards area-wide stormwater treatment has started in Tahoe, especially in locations where infiltration is not feasible at the parcel scale due to constraints like parcel boundaries, high groundwater, or shallow bedrock. The 2012 regional plan expanded allowances for area-wide treatment to all properties, not just those with constraints that limit infiltration, as long as they can demonstrate greater or equal water quality benefit to parcel scale BMFs. The Harrison Avenue area-wide treatment system in the city of South Lake Tahoe is one such example, recently installed to treat water runoff from roadways, public parking areas, and private properties collectively, while providing other community benefits. This image shows runoff from the public parking area that's collected and pre-treated before flowing into a large stormwater infiltration basin. However, the project area boundary extends beyond and collects runoff for treatment from the larger neighborhood as well. Here, residential and commercial properties, many limited by property boundaries to infiltrate on site, agreed in advance to contribute fees through a property assessment towards the construction and maintenance of the project in lieu of installing infiltration BMPs at the parcel scale on site. The Harrison Avenue area-wide treatment project provides additional community benefits beyond stormwater treatment by incorporating active transportation connections, bicycle and pedestrian amenities, benches, landscaping, and lighting, which make the project more attractive to the community to support and fund. To summarize, stormwater management seeks to manage pollution and erosion to protect water quality. It involves the use of policies and infrastructure that can have a big impact on the character of our communities as well. Stormwater can be managed on-site at the parcel level or at the area-wide or regional level. The best approach is dependent on the location, but typically area-wide level infrastructure is best suited for urban and suburban environments, and parcel level works best in rural environments. The right tools to manage stormwater are also dependent on the context and often involve a combination of different tools. Some parcel scale BMPs that stabilize sediment and maintain fire defensible space will always be required at the parcel scale. Managing stormwater runoff is critical to protecting Lake Tahoe, and it's an important challenge given that many of our communities were built well before infrastructure was in place. Can we envision a system that better protects our lake while also providing benefits for our communities and supporting other needs like workforce housing? That's an important question for cultivating community, which Jacob will go into more detail on after we take a few questions from you. So we have time for a few questions. Who has the first question?
Thanks, Shay. And if you have questions for Shay about stormwater management a little bit more broadly, please put them in the Q&A box. And I'll start off with one, Shay. Just talking about parcel level BMPs. You mentioned a couple of times the phrase stabilizing sediment. Can you give us a few examples of like what that actually looks like? We saw the I think you called them open cell pavers, the ones that you'll like
Yes.
drop your foot through if you walk across. Um, that seemed to be one example, but if you could give a few more.
Yeah, that's actually a great example. The open cell pavers used in the road shoulder there, you can imagine before those were in place, there was just a dirt right of way that people were parking in. And every time they pulled over and then pulled back into the right of way onto the road, they transported sediment with them. And sediment is one of the pollutants of concern that is affecting Lake Tahoe's clarity. So we want to try to stabilize that sediment by meaning keeping it in its place and not letting it get disturbed and transported, moved so that it's more easily transported to the lake. So once it gets driven onto the road, when it rains or with snow melt, it can flow into the nearest storm drain and out to the lake. Other examples could be if you live on a steep property, you might need retaining walls to stabilize a steep slope, or sometimes large angular rocks are used, what we call rock riprap, which we use to stabilize a slope as well. And then there can be other more non-structural BMPs, like with a construction site, making sure people are sweeping and cleaning up any sediment once it's been disturbed when they're actively doing construction on the site and driving in and out of a project area. Those can also be sediment, stabilizing sediment BMPs that do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kaylee, on the slides, if you don't mind putting up just that picture of like the concrete pavers that have the hole in the middle, just as another visual reminder of what we're talking about. Yeah, so basically, Shay, if I understand you correctly, like the dirt underneath, we don't want that to go anywhere. And parking on it, driving on it, walking on it can transfer it around and get it into the lake.
Yeah. And, just paving is another common way, which a lot of times is counterintuitive when people think about BMPs. Just putting down, paving your driveway. So again, when you're doing snow removal or you're driving in and out of your driveway, you're not taking that sediment and bringing it into the roadway. The benefit of these open cell pavers is they actually allow water to infiltrate through them, and they're not just generating more stormwater necessarily like if it was just a hard pavement surface.
Yeah, this seems a, like green and gray at the same time working together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we got a couple good questions. Um, kind of both having to do with filtration. So the first one, is there any monitoring of the stormwater runoff before it goes into the lake at the exit level from the infrastructure? So not at the drains, but
Mm-hmm.
the other end that I don't know the word for.
Yes. There is something called the R Swamp. It's the Regional Stormwater Monitoring Program, and it is led by the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, and they monitor several sites around the lake, outfalls, to determine, actually monitoring how much sediment is going into the lake. Oftentimes, these are downstream from a variety of different BMPs. But there is that ongoing monitoring of all of the lake. And then there are individual projects where properties that have BMPs installed, they might have individual monitoring where they're monitoring what comes into the system and then what goes out of the system. And those are unique to each individual BMP. Right now, the same group, the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, is initiating a project to use biochar, which is something that you amend the soil with to increase the infiltration capacity. And so they're doing a big project on some public water quality infiltration basins that are in Washoe County that take runoff from the highway. And they're going to be monitoring stormwater concentrations that come in and stormwater concentrations that come out to see, how much more this additive or amendment to the soil actually infiltrates water.
Cool. And can you give us that acronym one more time? Regional Stormwater Monitoring
Program, our
Program.
swamp.
Thank you. And I'm just sorry for everybody listening in. I'm throwing some stuff in the chat if you wanted to look up more information after.
Thank you.
Um, and then I think the last question for now, and then we'll move on to Jacob's Tahoe specific part is what is the filtration process? What are the particles and elements the filtration system is designed to capture?
Okay, so thank you. The main process of filtration for green infrastructure is through soil and plants as it then moves down through the soil profile. So the top layer of the soil profile is called the organic layer, and this is really the best area where the filtering takes place because there's a lot of other biological processes and activity in this O horizon or the organic horizon. And so things like oil and grease can be decomposed and broken down. But for Tahoe, it's fine sediment that is the primary pollutant of concern in terms of protecting Lake Tahoe's clarity. We want to protect fine sediment, which is 16 microns or less from reaching the lake. So a lot of times, the gray infrastructure that we talk about where stormwater flows off the road and then goes into a drop inlet, that might take out a lot of the coarse material like traction abrasive and gravel and sand, that is used for public safety in the wintertime. That is often cleaned out with a Vector truck. But the really fine sediment, 16 microns or less, often stays suspended in that water. And if that just flows out to the lake, it's still going to be negatively impacting Lake Tahoe's clarity. So we really want to then transport that runoff to then flow through sediment and vegetation in this green infrastructure and to infiltrate it, because the process of it flowing through the soil and then eventually raising groundwater that then flows out to the lake is the best way of removing this primary pollutant of concern from runoff.
Yeah, and I'm thinking again of the Harrison Avenue example of the curbs and gutters that captured the water off the road, but then it sends it into that infiltration basin to further
Exactly.
like settle out.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. So, to prolong the longevity of that basin, they have what we call pre-treatment. It captures everything and then it flows through, again, some gray infrastructure like a concrete baffle vault so that the coarse material can fall out. But like you said, then it flows into the infiltration basin where infiltrating through the soil takes out all of that fine sediment.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Shay. That's all the questions we have for now. So, Jacob, I'll turn it over to you rather, to talk
Great.
about stormwater in Tahoe.
Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Shay. That was really interesting, and I apologize, everyone. I'm not as smart about this stuff as Shay is, but you're stuck with me for the rest of the presentation, so my apologies. My name's Jacob Stock. I'm a senior planner here at TRPA, and I'm focusing on housing right now on this cultivating community project that if you all have been listening to our other Community Academy webinars, you're probably very familiar with. So I want to go back to Shay's question that she posed at the end of her presentation. How do we protect the lake and support workforce and affordable housing for our community at the same time? This is the central question of cultivating community. And stormwater policy actually has a really important role to play in that answer. So Shay gave us some useful background on stormwater management, what it is, what are some different types of stormwater management. To answer this central question about the connection between workforce housing and protecting the lake, we need to understand the system that we have here in Tahoe and how we got there. And so we'll go a little deeper into the basis of Tahoe's coverage policies and explore the unintended consequences and impacts, rather, the unintended impacts that coverage has on housing. So next slide, please. Thank you. So let's start with Tahoe's stormwater policies at a glance. We got them up here on this very boring slide. Stormwater management in Tahoe largely focuses on the parcel level, like Shay talked about. Our policies try to promote infiltration and prevent erosion by setting limits on parcel coverage and promoting best management practices on site. So those coverage limitations are central to our current policies, and they'll be the focus of this presentation for that reason. We have systems for establishing how much of a property can be covered, and I'll talk more about that later. And like our development rights system, which we talked about last time, you may remember, coverage is treated as a commodity that can be bought, sold, and transferred to other properties. There are some area-wide stormwater systems in Tahoe, and Shay gave you a few examples of those. But overall, our system still really relies on parcel-level stormwater management. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? Well, if you've heard me speak before, you might remember that the Tahoe region saw a major unregulated development boom beginning in the early 1960s. While in other regions, you might have seen the development of stormwater infrastructure to accommodate the growth of new neighborhoods. There were not stormwater standards and regulations in place at the time that really all of this development was happening. So the necessary infrastructure wasn't built. It's a bit ironic and actually a little bit tragic for that matter, since it's hard to imagine a more important reason for proper stormwater management than to protect Lake Tahoe, but this is the legacy that we inherited. Additionally, many of the most important watershed areas for natural filtration also happen to be wide, flat wetlands that are pretty well suited for development. So people saw those back in the 60s and they thought, well, this is a great place to build my house. In the absence of regulations protecting these areas, and I'll remind you, I actually failed to mention at the beginning of this slide that this all happened before TRPA and regulations, managing stormwater. Critical parts of our watershed were lost to development. So I'll give you an example. I've used this slide in every Community Academy presentation so far because it's such an important illustration of how we got to where we are now. You can see here's the Upper Truckee Meadow, once the largest natural watershed in the Sierra and a critical component of the Lake Tahoe watershed, filtering water, collecting all those fine sediments that Shay was talking about before it enters the lake. So that's what you see pictured here in 1939. Can you go to the next slide or advance this slide? Thank you. So on the right is the Tahoe Keys, a residential neighborhood that replaced a large portion of the marsh, along with its natural ability to collect and filter runoff. So, as you might imagine, absent adequate stormwater infrastructure, there have been real environmental consequences to that sort of development. The slow decline of Tahoe's famous lake clarity is one of the most visible consequences. So this was the reason for the creation of TRPA in 1969 and the 1987 Tahoe Regional Plan, to establish regulations that address the impacts of past development and prevent similar damage in the future. Preventing runoff to the lake is a key part of this mission. But this was not an easy task. A lot of the damage was already done to the natural watershed, and it's difficult to address this after the fact and without infrastructure already in place. And so we arrive at Tahoe's coverage system. You either love it or you hate it, but we all live with it. The basic reason for our coverage system is to control runoff and protect water quality on the parcel level in the absence of the comprehensive stormwater infrastructure that we've talked about. I know that Shay already defined coverage limits generally in her presentation, but let's talk more about the concepts behind coverage limits in Tahoe and how it works. So first of all, what does coverage even mean in Tahoe in the context of the Tahoe Basin? Coverage means any human modification on the ground that prevents water infiltration or native plant growth. So coverage can include a house, a patio, a driveway, a bocce ball court. The list goes on. It can even include bare ground that has been compacted to the point where it no longer supports drainage and vegetation. So you can think about, maybe some of you have a parking spot in your front yard that's just compacted bare ground. I know Catherine does. That can be considered coverage in the Tahoe Basin. So Tahoe's policies place limits on the amount of coverage on each parcel. How is this done? At the most basic level, each parcel is assigned a percentage of land that can be covered based on characteristics that make it harder or easier for a parcel to absorb and filter water. We call this land capability. Parcels are considered more sensitive if they are less able to absorb water. There are a lot of different reasons why a parcel might be sensitive. It could be on a steep slope, for example, where water runs fast down the slope. It can be near a stream with high groundwater, or it could have a soil type that's difficult for water to infiltrate. Generally speaking, parcels that are more sensitive have less allowed coverage. So coverage is based on land capability. We figured that out in the last slide. Whether or not a parcel is sensitive, how do we determine land capability? So it should come as no surprise by now that the answer is complicated. The original system used to figure out land capability is called the Bailey system, named after the author of the 1972 report that the method is based on. Bailey's is still used today to determine allowed coverage for single-family homes built before 1987. The other uses and for other uses as well, including multifamily and commercial development. So under the Bailey system, sites are assessed and assigned a score based on soil maps. That score of 1 to 7 determines the base coverage that is allowed on the property. So base coverage means the amount of coverage that someone is allowed to build without transferring in more coverage, which I'll talk about more later. This could range from 30% land coverage on the least sensitive parcels. So 6 and 7 scores, you can see we've got the table here on the slide. To 1% coverage on the most sensitive parcels. So like I mentioned, to go over base coverage, a property owner can transfer coverage from another site. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for now, I'll just say that Bailey also sets limits on the maximum amount of coverage that can be transferred to a parcel. So it sets the coverage limit and coverage maximum. Next slide, thanks. But Bailey's isn't the only system for determining land capability. From 1985 to 1987, TRPA worked with stakeholders to develop a more objective and accurate system, accurate at the parcel level, I should say, to replace Bailey's. The result was the Individual Parcel Evaluation System, or IPES. IPES applies to single-family homes only, and only to parcels that are vacant or were developed after 1987, so after this system was put in place. IPES assigns a numerical score ranking a parcel based on its suitability for development. So scores can range from 0 to 1,150, and you will be tested on this after the webinar. Parcels must meet a certain score to develop. In most places, that score has gradually been reduced to 1. So if you have an IPE score of 1, you are allowed to develop on your property. Like Bailey's, each IPE score corresponds to a percentage of allowable coverage. There are benefits to building under the IPE system, and it's important to note that these benefits only go to single-family homes, which creates a bit of an inequity in our coverage system there. Next slide. Okay, so I promised I would talk about coverage transfers as well. If you joined our last webinar on development rights, you might recall that the right to build on your property can be bought, sold, and transferred as a commodity. Development rights can be bought, sold, and transferred. The same is true of coverage. Property owners can purchase more coverage for a project up to a limit or transfer it from a sensitive to non-sensitive parcel, also up to a maximum limit. In this sense, coverage functions a bit like a development right, indirectly saying how much someone can build on their property and determining if development is even feasible on that property in the first place. And like development rights, when coverage can be bought and sold, those with the means to buy and sell have a bit of a leg up, creating another inequity in our coverage system. Uh, you can think of it this way: the cost to buy additional coverage, again up to a limit, for a large multi-million dollar home, relative to the cost of the total project, is much less than it would be for a smaller, more modest home. And that's not to mention the benefits afforded to single-family homes through IPES. In addition, multifamily development typically requires that additional coverage is purchased and transferred to a site. This can be expensive, and single-family homes rarely have to deal with this expense. Next slide. So I already mentioned how Tahoe's coverage policies can favor single-family homes, and as a commodity, that commodity that's bought and sold can ironically favor larger, more expensive homes. Um, there are other unintended consequences of our coverage system that impact housing at Lake Tahoe. Of course, none of these were intentional, but they are unintended consequences no less. So, like development rights, coverage can represent an additional cost and regulatory barrier in an environment where it's already very difficult to make workforce housing pencil out. Coverage limits can be one of many factors that make much needed housing and redevelopment projects infeasible. Projects can become too costly and infeasible when large portions of their project areas can't be covered by development. Similarly, coverage limits can lead to poor site design as developers and property owners try to maximize their coverage. So think about tapered driveways. Maybe you've seen tapered driveways in Tahoe, or the famous mushroom houses where the second level of the house bumps out. Um, these are uh, these are design choices that were created to maximize coverage. Um, And coverage limits can also favor spread out single family homes, leading to sprawl in some cases. And finally, it's important to note that the coverage system is highly complex, and there is a cost to that complexity. That cost can come in the form of people choosing not to redevelop blighted properties, leading to disruption in the stormwater system and impacts to the lake. So yeah, last slide. I think this is the last slide. Yeah. So what to make of all of this? Tahoe's coverage system was designed in response to a very difficult situation: how to address the environmental impacts of unregulated development built without adequate stormwater infrastructure, all in the context of Lake Tahoe's precious waters. It's difficult to quantify the benefits and costs of this system. We know that new regulated development has less environmental impact than the unregulated development that came before. So, in that sense, the system has been successful. We also know that coverage has consequences, making it more difficult to redevelopment in some cases and creating indirect barriers to multifamily and workforce housing in some cases as well. We've already made some progress in addressing these impacts. Recent rule amendments allow additional coverage, up to 100% actually, of a parcel in some cases, for deed restricted housing where there is a stormwater system in place. That's a big step for housing while maintaining environmental protection through area wide infrastructure. But there's there's more to do. We haven't solved the housing crisis, obviously. We're still trying to figure it out. So where do we go from here? I don't know the answer to that. Uh, the answer is probably actually a lot of different answers. And stormwater may or may not be a part of that. But among other things, we're looking at more potential changes to our coverage system and cultivating community. And the outcome will be the result of conversations with planners, with other experts like Shay and others, decision makers, and interested members of the community. And I'll finish now then by bringing us back to Shay's presentation. The right stormwater system, like Shay said, is usually a combination of different tools adapted to their environment. I think this is where we're going to find our answer through a combination of parcel level policies in our less populated areas and area wide treatment in our centers and more urbanized areas. So, with that little food for thought, I'll open it up to questions. There's a little QR code right there on the slide, and maybe we can put a link in the chat as well to the webinar survey when we're done. But we also have time for questions. So,
Thanks, Jacob. I'm, as you guys are both going through your presentation, I'm like, the image in my head, I'm kind of a, picture thinking person, is this like, the scales of justice, but whatever, just two scales, and they're kind of like going back and forth, trying to find that equilibrium between, the area wide stormwater management, just like what that system is designed to do, and the effects that it has on what actually can be built. Like coverage limitations serve a purpose, but they also can go counter to a different purpose. So anyway, just a little sharing of what's going on in my brain. I did want to point out and invite to the stage Julie Roll, who's a planner with TRPA in the permitting department, and she handles a lot of land capability challenges and knows a lot about coverage as well, the nitty-gritty, like day-to-day details. She shared with me, and I'll put this in the chat too, we have a land coverage page on our website, trpa.gov, that has a lot of information there. I know that's a hot topic for the public. And at the bottom of that page, there's a land coverage 101 box. And I just wanted to point out that coverage limitations are not unique to Tahoe. There's a lot of, across the country, coverage limitations are a tool to improve water quality. And with that, I'm going to tip this first question probably to Shay, but also jump in. Anyone else? How is treatment of stormwater different at Lake Tahoe than in other places?
I would say one of the main things that makes treatment of stormwater different for Lake Tahoe is that we are in a snow environment. So some things that maybe you would think about in terms of stormwater treatment in a different city like Portland or Seattle are not things that we do here because we have snow removal. And so that's where we talked about stabilizing sediment and how paving can be one of those things. That's actually one of our most important BMPs. But maybe if you lived in Portland, you wouldn't want to pave your driveway. You'd want to maybe use a gravel driveway so that water could infiltrate more. But here we want to make sure that because we're in an area that we want to remove snow, we don't want to have any disturbance of sediment. So that's one thing. Another thing I can think of is we actually have some of the most stringent stormwater regulations of anywhere in the continent because of Lake Tahoe's exceptional clarity and because of that outstanding national resource water designation. So we actually have our design storm is the 20-year 1 hour storm, which is basically equivalent of treating 1 inch of water from all of the impervious surfaces on a parcel. And in a lot of other places, they're only required to treat like the 2-year storm, because most of the pollutants like oil and grease or stuff that comes off, in some places it's trash or other things, that's usually comes in what's known as the first flush, where when it first starts raining, all of that pollution is swept away, and then as it continues, you have more dilution. But here we have rain on snow events, and again, our sort of unique setting with being in a snow environment. We want to have things designed to be able to deal with snow melt runoff, as well as thunderstorms in the summertime. So we have a higher design storm volume that we have to treat for.
Good, thanks, Shay. Yeah, it's a pretty important water resource that we have here, different from other places.
Yeah.
I've got a couple questions that are kind of permitting specific, so I'm going to tap Julie roll in. Julie, if you can turn your camera on for folks, and just keep in mind we've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we can also, if you don't feel like your question's been fully fleshed out, email housing@trpa.gov and we can get a little deeper. But Julia, if you can hit on the benefits for single family dwellings to build under the IPES system. Jacob mentioned that, and there's a question about that.
Sure. I'm Julie Roll, a senior planner with the Permitting and Compliance Department at TRPA. So the IPES system was created back in the mid 80s, really to address concern about residential development happening and like all these new subdivisions being created, new neighborhoods being created, and concern about sensitive land being built on. So originally our land capability system was based on, maybe you've heard of them referred to as Bailey maps, but they were large scale soil conservation service maps that were really based on like 40-acre scale plots. So not really drilled down to individual parcels. They were really looking at kind of a more landscape wide look at the basin. So IPES was created in order to get a more site specific, where we're looking at each individual parcel on a number of factors, not just the soil, not just the slope, but we're looking at the watershed, we're looking at vegetation, we're looking at potential for erosion and things like that. So it did change the types of properties that would be allowed to be built on, because based on just better information, better science, better, understanding of the soil, and just looking at a number of factors, there's actually overall more parcels that would be allowed to be built on under IPES than under the original Bailey land capability system, but not because it necessarily changed what we consider sensitive land, but it just gave us better information on each parcel and whether or not it truly was sensitive to erosion and was suitable for development.
Awesome, thanks, Julie. And this kind of piggybacks off, I think this might be for you, but if it's not, feel free to tag one of your coworkers. How do coverage requirements limit redevelopment? Is there an example you can provide?
How does it limit redevelopment? I mean, certainly, when looking at redeveloping a parcel, that's, a huge factor for just, is a project going to pencil out? Is how big can it be? How many units can we build? How many square feet? Things like that. So, in theory, yes, it could limit redevelopment if they're saying, oh, we can't build it large enough. However, keep in mind some of the, exceptions and things that Jacob talked about, where we allow additional coverage for certain types of, commercial and multifamily or affordable housing projects. And then also consider the fact that coverage that was built or created prior to 1972 can be verified and determined to be legally existing. So if there's an old property that was built in the 50s and 60s and there's, 60% coverage on the site, they can get that coverage verified through a verification application at TRPA. And if that's found to be legally existing before 1972, they can keep that coverage and redevelop it in a, a more environmentally sustainable way, or in a way that's more financially, able to pencil out. So, it could in theory limit redevelopment, but we don't see that often because a lot of the properties being redeveloped are, older and developed way before 1972 when the coverage limits were put in place. So I don't know if anyone else wants to touch on an answer to that, but that's my view on that.
Well, I would just add, I mentioned the cost of complexity, which I think is, worth mentioning here that just, if you're coming in, trying to do a workforce housing project it's it already requires oftentimes a lot of subsidy, to make a project like that pencil, and you don't have experience, working with the TRPA system, then that could be one of the factors that tips the scale, for your project. I don't. Would you agree with that, Julie?
Yes, of course, definitely.
Awesome. We have four more good questions that I think are worth answering. It is 3:01, so if you're not able to stay online any longer, thanks so much for being here. But this is being recorded, so if you're curious about the answers to these four questions that I'm teasing, you can check out the recording in a little bit. I wanted to hit on this next question, and Alyssa just jumped on the right moment. It touches on the phase 2 housing amendments that passed end of 2023. Wow. Don't communities that have stormwater infrastructure meeting TRPA standards have some greater development rights than others?
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Melissa Bettinger with TRPA. Yeah, so this I think that this question is related to the phase 2 housing amendments that we did pass recently. Basically, the phase 2 amendments allow higher coverage limits, depending on location only for deed restricted housing. And we haven't really gone in depth of what deed restricted housing is on this webinar, but we have lots of webinars where we do go in depth on that. But basically, we allow in town centers up to 100% coverage potentially, as long as certain requirements can be met. And then outside of town centers where we allow for multifamily housing, we allow up to 70% coverage, but there is the requirement for, in both of those cases, to be tied into an area-wide stormwater treatment system, which those are pretty limited in the basin right now. We're hoping that more are built over time, and there are a couple of questions about the effectiveness of those area-wide treatments and how to get financing for those in the chat. So we'll go through those if we have time.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, I'm gonna combine two of those that Alyssa just mentioned. Shay, I think this is for you. Are there any particular technologies or designs that are especially effective for stormwater treatment on site? And then also, how effective are area-wide stormwater treatment systems at removing sediment and pollutants?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. For the particular designs that are most effective, I would say systems that facilitate maintenance are the best ones, and that that promote infiltration. And infiltration, like we mentioned, is not feasible in all locations because there could be areas that have high groundwater or bedrock where infiltration isn't possible. But basically, systems that can infiltrate, I prefer what we call open systems, which means like stormwater infiltration basins or like a rockline swale that's easy to rake out, so that when sediment does fill up, it's a lot easier to be able to remove that sediment. One example, when we showed our dry well that had the sediment trap, when we first required dry wells, we didn't have the sediment trap as a requirement. And, when stormwater from a driveway, which has a lot of the traction abrasive in it, flows off and goes into that gravel dry well. It fills all the void spaces, and it can be really challenging to maintain it because you basically have to remove all the gravel and clean it out and put it back in. And it's pretty labor intensive, which means people typically aren't doing it. So now we require a sediment trap that the water flows into first, and it allows for that coarse material to settle out first before then flowing into the gravel and infiltrating into the system. So open systems where you can rake out material, or if you do have a gravel system, having a sediment trap to remove that sediment first. Systems that can facilitate maintenance are my preferred design. And as far as the second question about how effective are area-wide systems at removing sediment and pollutants, it is dependent upon the location. So for example, in an area where there is high groundwater, and all of the parcels are not able to meet TRPA's infiltration requirements, we know infiltration's the best way to remove sediment and pollutants, but it's not possible everywhere. So anytime there's an area-wide system in one of those locations, you are going to get better treatment overall because you're just increasing the amount of treatment that's being able to treat all of the neighborhood's runoff, because you can't actually treat it at the parcel scale. And there's different ways, if it's a wet basin or a wetland, that allows for water to sediment again to settle out. And there's other processes that remove nutrients that's happening. But for other places where infiltration is possible, we actually have code requirements that have to, for an area wide to be put in place, it actually has to demonstrate that it can provide the same amount or better treatment than parcel level BMPs. So that's actually a requirement that we have to show and meet before an area wide can be built in places where infiltration is possible. And then go ahead, Catherine. I have the questions pulled up, so I'm reading them too.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Yeah, we have a couple good finance questions. I think these will be the last two that we take because we are over time. But good to address, who's paying for what. Are there publicly available examples of how community stormwater systems have been funded or financed in the basin? And if not, what other examples has TRPA looked at?
Yeah, I can speak to that. There are examples of stormwater systems. So TRPA code for developing an area-wide system, our code allows that a fee can be collected by the implementer, which is typically the local jurisdiction, that they can collect a fee in lieu of parcels installing infiltration on site. And that sometimes the fee is used for construction and or maintenance. These fees can be collected in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's through like a property assessment, or a one-time lump sum fee and a connection agreement with the local jurisdiction. On the Nevada side, we actually have a lot of what are called general improvement districts, which are the districts for different communities, and they do trash removal and snow removal. And oftentimes they are already having a rate that is paid, that people pay on a quarterly or annual basis. And so though those fees are collected, they can go towards stormwater maintenance as well.
Great. And then I think I understand this question, but maybe you will understand it just from being a stormwater management guru. Is there a typical order of magnitude cost for installing these systems per site square foot or acre foot of runoff?
Yeah, so what we've found is in most cases, it is less expensive for a property to participate in an area-wide system than to install all of the on-site BMPs. And it's just, because installing everything on site, you know, there's a lot of different infrastructure components and they can be expensive, and also the need to do routine maintenance on all of these individual components can be expensive. So if that parcel can send its runoff into the right of way that gets treated in a system where the local jurisdiction is performing maintenance, it often is it's much less expensive for the individual property than doing it parcel by parcel. Sometimes that fee is assessed based on how much impervious surface the property has. Sometimes it's, you know, figured out as a lump sum fee for residential versus commercial. But we have found that overall it is less expensive than installing it at the parcel scale.
Great, thanks, Shay. And that was the last question. And I'll just wrap up by saying we also have a BMP website called TahoeBMP.org that answers all your BMP questions and gives you the contact info for our BMP Superstar team. If you have more questions about that, if you have more questions about the Housing and Cultivating Communities Initiative, it's housing@trpa.gov. And I think unless anyone has any final thoughts critical to share, I'll wind us down here. Please take the survey, let us know your thoughts on this webinar or future topics. And thanks so much for your participation.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks.
Great,
Bye.
have a good day. Have a great day.